Those were the main headlines. And more details. President Fattah al-Sisi on Saturday directed to focus on localizing the industry and technology related to the construction and infrastructure sectors. This came during the President's meeting with Presidential Advisor for Urban Planning, Major General Amir Saeed Ahmed, head of the Armed Forces Engineering Authority, Major General Ihab Al-Far, Director of the Armed Forces Survey Department, Major General Khalid Fawzi, and a number of high-ranking officials. Presidential spokesman Ambassador Bassam Raji said that the meeting tackled the situation of a number of projects being implemented by the Armed Forces Engineering Authority. Details.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi met on Saturday with the Presidential Advisor for the Planning, Major General Amir Ahmed, of the Armed Forces Engineering Authority, Major General Ihab Al-Far, Director of the Armed Forces Al-Khawzi, and the number of Armed Forces Engineering Authority officials. Presidential spokesman Bassam Radi said that the meeting tackled the progress of the implementation of projects carried out by the Engineering Authority across Egypt. He added that the President gave his directives to focus on localizing the industry and technology for the direct impact on the and for the comprehensive development process in the country. He also conducted rationalizing the imports in participation of the business community in various developmental sectors. President al-Sisi was also briefed on the progress of a number of construction projects in the new administrative capital, especially the military academy at the Strategic Command headquarters, as well as the interior design and the artwork of the Mosque of Egypt, including its halls, especially Dar al-Quran. He was updated on the status of the Egypt International City for the Olympic Games. The President was also briefed on the progress of the new roads and access projects implemented nationwide, including establishment of the Dar access above the Nile River in Sohag Governorate, as well as the developments pertinent to a series of projects that seek to make the optimal use of the vacant lands on both sides of the roads and the access in Greater Cairo. Ambassador Rodi revealed that the President was also briefed on the efforts to develop airports in South Sinai Governorate, especially the airports of Sharm el-Sheikh, At-Tur, and St. Catherine, as well as Hurghada Airport and the entrances, the roads and the access to Sharm el-Sheikh within the framework of the state's efforts to raise the efficiency of the city's infrastructure ahead of hosting the United Nations Climate Change Conference 2022, the COP27, in November.
Egypt celebrates on March 19th a dear anniversary for all Egyptians. That is the 33rd anniversary for the liberation of Taba and the hoisting of the Egyptian flag high over it. Details.
March 19th marks a powerful historic moment in modern Egypt as Egyptian sovereignty was restored from Israel over Taba city in South Sinai. Despite being a small city in the region, the story of Taba's return to Egypt remains pivotal in Egyptian-Israeli relations. Taba's liberation sends a strong message to the world that Egypt is able to use all means to protect its land and dignity, whether through armed means, as in the War of Attrition and the 1973 October War, or through political and diplomatic actions during the Egypt-Israeli separation of forces agreement in 1974, the Camp David Accords, and finally the liberation of Taba. Israeli forces had occupied the Sinai Peninsula during the 1967 war. The diplomatic and law battle started with senior diplomats, historians, and men of law. Following the Israeli withdrawal, the cities of Rafah in North Sinai and Sharm el-Sheikh in the south were also under the Egyptian control. It was not until March 1989 that Taba was fully restored to the Egyptian sovereignty. This was the last pocket of the Sinai Peninsula returned to Egypt after judges involved in international arbitration ruled in Egypt's favor in 1986. The 13-day negotiations produced two accords, including a framework for peace in the Middle East and another framework for the conclusion of peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. The latter was signed on March 26, 1979, paving the way for the first peace treaty between both sides. The Israeli withdrawal came following the signing of the Camp David peace treaty between Egypt and Israel in September 1978. Finally, former President Hosni Mubarak raised the Egyptian flag on Taba on March 19, 1989, declaring the return of the city to Egypt.
As Egypt celebrates on March 19 the 33rd anniversary for the liberation of Taba and hoisting the Egyptian flag high over it, news sector correspondent Ragda Munir conducted the following interview with Dr. Mufid Shahideen, professor of international negotiation, which did in gaining Taba back. The Egyptian team faced by then as the Israeli side threatened to withdraw from the negotiations in a very critical phase. The then new Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres wanted to visit Cairo, as former President Hosni Mubarak said that this can happen only if the Israeli leader announced an official return to the negotiating table. And with the efforts exerted by the Egyptian side and according to international law, Taba returned to Egypt as the last part of its land seized illegally by Israel. Shahab stressed that those days will remain unforgettable, source of pride for all Egyptians. In light of the Interior Ministry's efforts to detect crimes of fraud and the General Administration of Supply Police, 9942 different cases during the last week. Another campaign aimed at achieving traffic movement that has detected more than 320,000 different cases. In the tourism security field, the Interior Ministry detected 784 violations. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's visit to the United Arab Emirates left the U.S. profoundly disappointed, urging to avoid normalizing ties with a regime accused of horrific atrocities. They said Assad's surprise trip on Friday